Welcome to Beyond the Valley, a CNBC Tech podcast with Arjun Karpal and Tom Chitty.
Beyond the Valley.
3 hours and 15 minutes. That's the daily average amount of time I spent on my smartphone last week. Could my time be better spent? As an adult, that's up to me. But for children in many countries, that choice could be taken away with a growing movement to ban smartphones in schools. This week, we'll talk about how we got here, where and why this is happening, and whether many tech companies should be worried. Arjun's with us in the studio, and we have a special guest this week. His name is Joe Ryrie, co-founder of Smartphone Free Childhood, a grassroots community of more than 100,000 parents across the UK and around the world. According to their LinkedIn page, they aim to fight back against big tech's increasing colonisation of childhood. Joe, thanks for joining us on Beyond the Valley.
Good to be here.
Before we get into it, Joe, I know you know how to play Stat of the Week, so we're just going to hear Arjun's Stat of the Week.
It's 1.23 billion.
1.23 billion. I like to make a note, Joe, just so that I can work on that if you want. I mean, you probably got a better memory.
I'll give you a unit. I guess 1.23 billion units. It's not like a dollar figure or anything like that.
Okay, 1.23 billion. All right, yeah. Fantastic.
Got it.
You got it. So, Joe, I've explained a little bit about Smartphone Free Childhood, but give us an idea of kind of who you are and how this movement started.
Sure. It's quite a strange story actually. It's quite surreal for me to be sat here talking to you guys about this because 6 months ago we had no idea that this was going to crop up in our lives. We didn't intend on starting this thing. It really came about because of a viral moment. We've got a 9-year-old daughter. She was 8 in February when this thing kicked off, and we've been increasingly worried about the fact that she was starting to reach the age of smartphone maturity. It seemed like children in her class were starting to get smartphones, and this seemed kind of crazy. Like it was only yesterday that she was in nappies, right? And now suddenly some of her friends are getting smartphones. So this was something that we were worried about, and my wife and our friend Claire were particularly worried about this situation because it felt like everyone was just sleepwalking into this situation where this technology is so prevalent, and it's just the done thing that you give your child a smartphone towards the end of primary school, the start of secondary school, and that's just how it is. We were worried about this, and Daisy and Claire started a WhatsApp group. The idea was just to exchange ideas with anyone else who was worried about this topic, about how to kind of challenge the expectation that you were going to give a 9, 10, 11-year-old kid a smartphone, because we all feel that I think most parents feel quite uncomfortable about that situation because we know the effect that these devices have on our lives. We know how addicted they are. And then Daisy did a post about it on Instagram. She doesn't have a huge following, but she's got a couple of thousand followers, and it just caught fire. This one post, it was a heartfelt post about her feelings around giving our daughter a smartphone age 9 and how she didn't want to do it. And just people started piling on this post. She posted a link to the WhatsApp group. The WhatsApp group filled up overnight. I think that there's a slightly strange limit on WhatsApp groups of 1,024 people. So in a few hours, that 1,024 people was full. I had to start a second WhatsApp group, and then people started starting their own Smartphone Free Childhood WhatsApp groups all over the country. And the common theme was, this is an issue that no one's really talking about, but it's one of the biggest challenges that I face as a parent. I feel powerless. I can't do anything about it. What can we do? By the end of week 1, I think there was 10,000 people in WhatsApp groups across the country. We kind of then were faced with this question of what to do with this momentum. So we started doing some research, building some content, creating some resources. We spun out a quick website. And over the course of the past 6 months, we've been spending a huge amount of energy and time, most of our time, thinking how do we turn this viral moment, how do we turn it into a movement and a campaign and an organisation that can actually create real change, and that's at societal level, but also potentially help persuade the powers that be to do more about this topic.
And what would you say are your goals then, Joe, in terms of what's the end game here? Do you want to enforce some sort of legislative change? What does that look like? What would you say are the sort of main goals here?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And look, the more that we've researched this issue ourselves, and we were by no means experts in this space, like I said, it's very much an accidental movement. But the more we research this problem, the more we realise that this is actually a systemic problem that we find ourselves in. The way that we characterize it is that parents have been put in an impossible position. So let's say that you're a parent of an 11-year-old, and you, like we do, feel kind of uncomfortable about the idea of giving your child a smartphone. It's not the device itself, it's actually having unrestricted access to the internet and social media in your pockets at all times, right? There's a huge amount of evidence out there, and let's assume that you're uncomfortable about that, and you'd rather not give your child a product that you know to be harmful, right? Like most parents wouldn't want to do that to their child. But 11 has become this kind of rite of passage. When children go to secondary school, it's just become the norm that you get them a smartphone. It's like part of the back to school kit. Like that's what happens, and that's really a slippery slope. So if you don't want to do that, then you face a choice. You either say no, I'm not going to give my child a harmful product. But if you do that, then you risk alienating them from their social group at exactly the time of their lives that you really want them to be finding independence and making new friendship groups. And that's because everyone's doing it. Like Jonathan Haidt, who you've probably come across in recent months, he describes it as a collective action problem. And it's exactly that. Not being connected to social media, not having a smartphone really ostracizes your child from a social group. So that's the problem that we find ourselves in.
But Joe, just to jump in there, I mean, when you talk about the safety element, right, and protecting young people from what they can see on smartphones and how that may be affecting their mental health, but everyone parents differently, right? Everyone has a different viewpoint. So the counterpoint to that might be a parent who says, well, my child is now going to secondary school, and they have to travel on a bus, or they have to walk a great distance, and I'd like to be able to contact them anytime, anywhere, and even be able to track them. And that's increasingly popular amongst parents, is tracking where their children are. That's a whole other issue that we won't get into now. But how do you get consensus when everyone's got a different way of parenting and a different opinion on life's risks and rewards?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we're really not one thing to be clear from the outset is we're not calling on a ban on smartphones. We are saying that we don't think smartphones should be allowed in school. Yes, parents will all have sit on a different position on the spectrum on this one. Of course, all parents will want to be able to get in touch with their children. A basic brick phone, simple phone, feature phone, whatever you want to call it, does do almost all the things that you need to do at that age. Of course, for us as adults, a smartphone is, we run our lives through these devices and they're such useful tools. But for children, if you just want to be able to message your child and make sure you can get in contact with them, then at the moment, when there isn't a sort of specific child phone out on the market, and we can come to that, we think that there's a real opportunity for device manufacturers to build these phones, then that's a more than sort of workable option.
Joe, just want to clarify as well. Is your sort of aim, at least sort of in the nearer term, to have smartphones banned in schools, almost as a way to kind of level the playing field to some extent, right, and take that choice out of the hands of parents who are having this debate about my kid's going to school now, should we be giving them a smartphone or not?
The school thing really does feel like a no-brainer. Having a lot of schools, people don't even realise, in secondary schools, most secondary schools in the UK, I think it's only 11% of secondary schools in the UK have an outright ban where you cannot access your phone in the day. A lot of them have a policy where if you see them, they get confiscated. But even just having a phone on your person, in your bag at school, we can all imagine how distracting that is. And teachers, we hear countless stories of teachers who tell us how disruptive they are. Children can't concentrate. We know how difficult it is to concentrate when our phones are on us. I think the average notification a teenager gets, it might be a US stat, I'm not sure, but 237 notifications a day. How are you possibly going to concentrate on your academic work? There's all sorts of safeguarding issues that come with it, and there's all kinds of issues around how children are socialising. So, whether we want children to be spending their break times looking at screens and messaging each other, or actually going out and playing and doing all the things that children have done for millennia. So we feel like schools is a really great place to start. It's probably the simplest piece of legislation that could be passed, because there's very little pushback. And actually, over the course of the past 6 months, loads of schools are changing their policies. The whole town, St Albans, all the primary schools in St Albans came together to say they're not going to allow phones in primary schools. All the heads of I think it's 26 primary schools came together Similar things have been happening. The education minister in Northern Ireland passed a new legal guidance saying all secondary schools must be phone free. So we think schools are a really great place to start, but of course the issue of smartphones goes far beyond the school gates, and it's really about like the relationship that children have with these devices 24/7 that we're trying to change the culture around.
In terms of the age group, because obviously at school, in the UK, you may be in high school up until the age of 18, and then potentially, obviously, after that into university or college. Is there an age during sort of the high school period in which you feel it may be appropriate that children start getting smartphones?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really like interesting and contested one. Everyone's going to have a slightly different perspective on whether they'd rather their child didn't have a smartphone and social media till 16, or actually they feel like 14 is a more appropriate age, or different people in our groups have very different perspectives on this. It's not as simple as like people say it's like smoking, ban cigarettes, they're dangerous. It's not as simple with smartphones. There are of course like benefits to be had, but we're just talking about how can we create a situation where children get an age-appropriate experience of the internet. Most of our focus is really on the sort of primary school and transition to secondary school, those first few years of secondary school where the risks and the potential dangers significantly increase or outpace any kind of potential benefits that children will have.
I thought it was interesting as well. You said, the school is a good place to start, but it's also about that broader relationship between younger people and the smartphone. And of course, as Tom sort of laid out earlier, and you've mentioned as well, there's so many benefits to having a smartphone. I mean, as an adult, basically do everything on it. But there are, even for children, advantageous things, whether it be sort of educational applications, whether it be mapping and that safety element of tracking to some extent, payments, even kids who have bank accounts and money related things too. There's a lot that you can do on a smartphone as well. So when it comes to a healthy relationship with a smartphone, for example, because there will be a lot of children who will continue to have smartphones, whose parents will continue to give them smartphones. What does a healthy relationship look like, and actually how does that happen? Whose job is that? Is it the parents to teach their kids how to use it? Is it device manufacturers and app makers limiting screen time and having tools in place? What does it look like to you? What's the vision and I guess the dream vision for you in terms of a healthy relationship with smartphones?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one to dig into, and this idea of a healthy relationship with technology we're so far from that at the moment. I think you said in your introduction, Tom, that you spend 3.5 hours a day or something on your phone. The stats for children are really, really alarming. I think there's different stats in the US, UK, but somewhere between 4 and 5 hours a day is the average time that teenagers spend on their smartphones. And so even if you forget about all the potential harms of smartphones, and we could list them all as, from the harmful content that they might see to the grooming and, sextortion we hear a lot about, cyberbullying. There's so many real serious risks. Even if you forget about those, which of course we shouldn't, just children spending that amount of time on a device is a really troubling statistic, because it obviously means that that time spent on a phone is displacing so many real world activities that are fundamental to healthy development. So yes, we would say that of course parents have a role in managing their children's online habits, but parents are on their own, and they're up against the most powerful companies in the world. Not only just the most powerful companies in the world, the most powerful companies in human history, who are creating these devices and these platforms, these social media platforms, with one goal and one goal only, and that's for people to spend as much time as possible on these devices. You guys know this far better than I do. That is the whole business model of social media. So it's a totally unfair playing field, and the idea that it has to be up to parents to be able to regulate their children's online usage and manage it is really unfair. And also the children's brains just simply aren't ready for it. These are adult products. They're designed for adults. The device is designed for adults. The social media platform is designed for adults. We know how difficult it is to regulate our own behaviours on these platforms and our own time spent on these devices. And so when they're targeted at the adolescent brain that is hardwired for peer approval, they want to be able to make sure they fit in with everyone else. That's what your kind of goal is as a young as a sort of a child going through puberty. And your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. You can't like fully deal with impulse control. So it's a real toxic cocktail. And then you put it in children's pocket, right? That's the other thing that is an interesting. We've all got so used to carrying these devices around, but just 15 years ago, no kids had these things. The speed of this technological change is absolutely extraordinary, right? And even 5 or 6 years ago, most people didn't have data plans that meant, and 4G, that they could be on the internet the whole time, everywhere. And so this confluence of things, addictive by design apps targeted at children who aren't really ready for it, and having the internet and social media in your pocket the whole time means like moderate behaviour is almost impossible. So what we're trying to do is say, right now, in the absence of any like strict government regulation, it's going to take a long time. Of course, these things take time, and there'll be a journey to get there. The best solution is for parents to come together and agree just not to do it, agree not to get their children's smartphones until what we're saying is till the end of year 9. A lot of the data say that means you get over the sort of riskiest age group, particularly for young girls. And so that's the first port of call, is just for parents to agree. Let's collectively say, no, we're going to pause, we're going to stop. We're going to give our children the opportunity to develop without being online so young. And then secondarily, we do feel like there needs to be some tougher government regulation to try and make sure that children get an age-appropriate experience on the internet, and whether that's, age verification seems to be an obvious part of that picture. So that social media platforms and the device manufacturers are forced to ensure that children get an experience that is appropriate for their age.
But a lot of this, right, with smartphones is, on the one hand, you've got the device, but a lot of the problems that we've been talking about are related to social media. So long term, is it more of a plan? Is there more of a plan to regulate the social media better? Because ultimately, a smartphone without any social media on is what we used to have, bar the maps and the camera and whatnot. But is it the social media really that needs to be regulated better and made safer? And as you said, better controls over the age limits and who can access this sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Tom. Absolutely, the social media is where most of the issues lie, but it's because it's now available in our pockets 24/7 that's fundamentally changed the dynamic here. So Facebook was certainly around, and Twitter long before smartphones, and our relationships with those platforms was totally different because it wasn't in our pockets 24/7, like alluring us and like telling us to check it constantly. It's a combination of those two factors. It's like the network effect of social media, accessible via your smartphone 24/7. That is how we need to think about it. Much more needs to be done. A lot of work has been going on in that space already, and there's the Online Safety Act coming to play in the UK, which is going to hopefully strip out some of the most dangerous content from social media platforms. But it doesn't really address this addictive by design thing. Even if your children aren't seeing beheading videos, which we know, like, I think it's something like 50% of 12-year-olds in the UK have seen a beheading video. If they're not seeing extreme pornography, which we know like 12% of 12-year-olds have seen pornography, if they're not being groomed, if they're not being sextorted, all this stuff that does actually happen, if they're just spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day on social media, which we know is commonplace, like that's from the latest Ofcom report that came out in March, that is a real problem for our children, is a real problem for parents. And so, yeah, we need to think about the addictive by design nature of the social media platforms, and we also need to think about proper age verification on the platforms and on the devices. That means that you are given an experience that is less addictive, and it means you're not getting served this type of content that we know is very dangerous.
So some of the criticisms of a ban of smartphones in secondary schools, primary schools, answer some of these after I finish. It could potentially create a digital literacy gap that could have lasting consequences, is one. Should it be integrated into educational systems in a balanced and responsible way? Should we be punishing children for the failures of tech companies to protect them? And finally, what about, children who can self-regulate or should be allowed the chance to self-regulate their use of smartphones and choosing to use it only when they need to.
There's quite a few questions to write down, let alone think about how to respond to. The digital literacy one, it's not like these devices are particularly complicated to learn how to use, right? Like if we just delay by a few years, and like you've seen those videos of like 1-year-olds swiping on iPads, like these devices are so intuitive that we really don't think it's an issue that children need to learn how to use these dangerous things when they're young, so that they're going to be able to use them when they're older. Like that's just, it doesn't really stack up. Similarly for like integrating technology into education, it's already happening. Even children having homework on screens, like most schools would like do that already. Staying up late looking at screens is probably not a good thing for their healthy development, let alone their sleep. So there's all kind of problems with like integrating this kind of technology into the education system. And I think the idea of parents saying, "Oh, it's absolutely fine. My child's totally fine with it." That of course, many children will be, and there'll be many children who are able to have a balanced relationship with this technology. But we feel like that's probably because they've got parents who have the time, who have the tech knowledge, who have that capacity to be able to monitor their online lives. So actually, the real risk is creating this digital divide where you've got children who have parents who maybe have some experience with tech, or certainly have the savviness of managing technology and the capability to manage that technology. They have the time, they have the privilege to be able to monitor their children's online education and online lives and online development, and those who don't. And we know that actually it's the children from the least advantaged areas, from the who suffer most from many of these harms online. And so we think that that of course there will be parents who think, well, my child's fine, but we want to look at it at a societal level as well.
Joe, can I pick up on the sort of, we've got listeners all around the world. So just want to pick up on more of the global situation, and you can tell me about what you've seen globally, but I do want to just start with China for a moment. When I was living there, they enacted a law in 2021 that restricted children under the age of 18 years from playing online video games for more than 3 hours per week. This was was trying to be enforced by the gaming companies, those who were developing the games, through things like facial recognition to verify that it was the adult rather than the child playing the game, and various other means as well. And there have been other situations floated in China. Of course, it's a completely different political situation in terms of being able to enact such laws. But one of the striking things about that would happen was, I had a lot of messages from people around the world saying, this is a great idea. This is a great, in other countries as well, saying, I wish we could have this in our country. Just talk to me about, the China situation as you've seen it, whether that's feasible here or elsewhere in the world.
I mean, I don't know a huge amount about the specifics of the legislation they passed. What I do know is that TikTok is a Chinese company, and they don't let their children use an unrestricted version of TikTok. So there's a Chinese version of TikTok. I think it's called Douyin. Probably got the pronunciation totally wrong. It's designed to be less addictive. So there's infinite scroll is disrupted. I think there's a 3-second or 4-second pause between videos, so you don't have that constant stream of videos. So it's far less addictive, and they specifically prohibit certain types of content, and they only show content that is in some way educational. And of course, I'm sure it's not all peaches and cream, but it is possible for another version of these technologies and these platforms to exist. And if they, of course, we're not going to look to China and not like authoritarian state to, for policy ideas, but I think it's interesting conceptually. They've said, no, this is a problem. We don't want this for our children, and we're going to make it safer for them. So it is possible to do it, and actually it's relatively straightforward for them to implement that technology, as far as I'm aware.
And has smartphone-free childhood got awareness globally, or have you seen other movements in other countries around the world trying to address a similar issue as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, right from the start, we started getting emails from people all over the world saying, this is a huge issue in our country. How can we do what you've done? We want, we're desperate for solutions as well. There's one stat that is really, really shocking, actually. So HMD, the guys who own the Nokia brand in the UK, they're really interested in this space for obvious reasons. They did a research project recently where they surveyed 10,000 parents globally about their experience of children and smartphones, parents who've given their children smartphones. And I think it's like 75% of those parents say that smartphones negatively affect family life. 33% of those parents have been brought to tears by their child's smartphone addiction. That's a really shocking statistic. If we assume that we can trust that data, it's from a pretty reputable source. A third of parents are crying because of this, because they see the changes in their children and they see the direction of travel, and it causes so many arguments.
And they struggle to control it. I assume, it's very difficult to keep tabs.
It's really difficult to keep tabs, and it means that there's a constant source of arguments. So we're very lucky that our child doesn't have a smartphone yet, so we haven't got into that situation. But it's like a running battle of like trying to manage the situation, trying to like keep tabs on it, and trying to set rules and set boundaries around it. So parents everywhere are like really, really struggling with the situation, and that's all over the world. So we said, right, people want to do what we've done. We decided to do a webinar just explaining like the sort of process that we've been through to try and like build this thing, or how it went viral and how we tried to turn it into a campaigning organisation. We set up a webinar, and what was the numbers? 600 people from 60 countries signed up to this webinar who wanted to do it in their countries. And subsequently, we haven't had time to support all those people, obviously, but we've created a few documents and resources, and I think there are Smartphone Free Childhood spin-off movements now in 20 or 30 countries all over the world, like Brazil, Argentina, Switzerland, France, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, even in places like the UAE, Africa. Like this is a global problem, and I think it's only getting worse, and it's only going to become more of a challenge for parents everywhere unless we do something about it.
Why do you think that there is such a broad consensus across the political spectrum? In the US, you've got Democrat and Republican states pushing for some sort of legislation. We've already seen certain districts ban smartphones in schools to varying degrees of success, but certain schools have now fully banned smartphones. Why do you think this movement is happening now? Because it was only 2023 when the UN had a report which essentially called for a ban on smartphones in schools to combat classroom distractions within the classroom and cyberbullying. So is it because it's the start of school, or is it people had a real difficult time over the summer holidays, or has this just been building over the last few years?
No, yeah, I think this is just uncorked something, and none of us have voted for this. None of us have been consulted in this. It's just what's happened, and so I think so many people feel that something's wrong here, but people feel powerless. People think, oh, this is just how it is. This is just the way it is. This is what childhood's like now. Even if they might like intuitively feel that something is wrong, it's just kind of how childhood is. And so I think that's the big thing, is that people feel it deeply. I think we all know, I myself included, I would say I've got an average addiction to my smartphone, and it's a problem in my life. Like I'm just normal. Like I just spend so much time on it, and I know that it's an issue in my own life. And I think most parents probably feel that their own relationship with their smartphone is problematic, and of course they don't want to pass that down to their children. So yeah, I think it's like the strength of feeling about this has really been extraordinary to be part of. People are like taking action on the ground because they feel so strongly about this thing. And I think it's just a consequence of that rapid technological change that means that this was waiting to happen, basically.
I also want to bring Arjun back in just finally to wrap up, but should, tech companies be worried? Because, I remember my first ever smartphone that I got. I think it was a birthday present from my parents. And I remember opening this sleek, cool design of the box and this incredible looking device with a huge screen. And I thought, well, with the knowledge that we now have, will generations, our children's generation, future generations, see these exciting products actually as more of a necessity and realise that actually be wary of this device and what it could potentially do to your behaviour and your mental health?
What are the trade-offs for all this convenience that we love and all this utility that we have and all these amazing things that this technology can do, like, what are we losing here? Like, what's the downsides? I think that needs to be a conversation that is had like everywhere, and that's part of the thing that what we want to do with this movement. One of the main things that we want to do is just to encourage this conversation to happen, because I think when people engage with it, when people really think about it, the vast majority of people are like, yeah, there is something up here. Like, maybe we do need to question this. And it's been, these companies, like, they are like largely totally unregulated compared to the amount of power that they have, the amount of influence they have in our lives and now our children's lives. And I think people are waking up to say, hang on a minute, that isn't necessarily a good thing, and we need to question it. So yeah, I think we're really excited about the fact that this feels like the tip of the iceberg, and it feels like people are suddenly starting to question the status quo and say, no, actually, maybe there is a better way of doing things, and I think that is a narrative that is going to continue.
And finally, just Arjun, that comment on tech companies in general, will this, cause them to take notice and maybe change how addictive their devices are, or is this something that they'll wait and see whether this movement, as Joe's talking about, gathers pace?
Yeah, I think it's two parts. The device makers have spoken a lot recently, Apple, Samsung, and others, about limits you can put on, but do people do it? I don't. And that's another question. But there are tools there, but you have to work out how to use them, and certainly no kid by themselves is going to go out and do that. So maybe they'll start thinking about new controls, parental controls almost, that can be put on phones as well. So that's on the device front. I mean, the app makers, as Joe's been speaking about, as we've been speaking about, they make their money from engagement and time spent, eyeballs on the app. I think it's going to be a harder task for them to change, and I think a lot of the change that has happened has come from government intervention in many cases, saying, well, you can't show this, or these are the things that you're not allowed to show. You think about some of the EU legislation currently around misinformation and things on the platform, and the fines being levied. So it's governments taking action and regulating that might force the change there, but it doesn't feel like they're necessarily going to do it off their own back at this point, given that their business model is so heavily reliant on engagement at this point in time.
Okay, Joe, we'll leave it there. But before we wrap up, we've got to play Stat of the Week, just to lighten the mood a little bit. Arjun, just remind us.
Yeah, 1.23 billion units.
Some sort of unit. Joe, as the guest, you can choose to go first or second.
I'll go second. Give me a second to think about this.
1.23 billion units. The number of smartphones sold to children under the age of 16.
And your guess, Joe?
I was about to say exactly the same thing, so I'll say something different.
This happened last episode, so don't.
You can go with the same answer.
I should have gone. I should have gone first, and I would have been able to take the first guess. The number of social media accounts of children under 16.
Do you know what? Both very, very good guesses. I'll be honest. Both wrong, but both very, very good. It's actually a lot more simpler than that, quite frankly. It's just the number of smartphones forecast to be shipped this year, according to IDC. I wanted to pick that out because, just highlights the sheer volume of devices being shipped. And the reason I actually was looking at that stat this week was because I was trying to compare it to headsets, virtual reality and augmented reality headsets, because I was looking into a story regarding that, and that was insignificant in comparison to the smartphones, and it still shows people are buying them. They're still being shipped. They're still huge, and they're returning back to growth in terms of the amount of volume being shipped. So there's still huge demand from them, and I think that relationship change, if there is one, if the world woke up and had a change of relationship with smartphones, that could certainly impact sales without a doubt. When you think about it.
Absolutely. Really interesting point to finish on. Just before we go, if you have any questions about this episode or past episode, you just want to contact Arjun and I, then please email us at beyondthevalley@cnbc.com. That's it for this episode. You can also follow and subscribe and even leave us a review. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, guys. It's been a fun conversation. And I'll give one shout out at the end. If you are interested in what we've been talking about, follow us on our social channels, LinkedIn, Instagram. You'll find it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll be back next week for another episode of Beyond the Valley. Goodbye.
Beyond the Valley.